We now move on to the final part of the debate, where the members of the panel will be able to come back and make final points. We are going to go in reverse order. So the first person to conclude from the side against the motion that Russia is not becoming our enemy is Robert Legvold. Robert.
This is a country with an enormous number of major foreign policy problems, and the next administration, Republican or Democrat, is going to have to review the whole gamut of U.S. foreign policy, not just struggle with this problem of the Iraq War. I think the last thing that we want to do at this point, what we do want to do, is reduce the number of problems. We don't want needlessly to add problems. As I've said, phrasing the issue as though Russia is becoming the enemy, which has implications for action, is not cost-free. And at a time when we have so many issues where cooperation with Russia is important, and it's not absent, we're getting it in a number of important respects, it is the struggle on global terrorism. There is still essentially a cooperative relationship in dealing with that problem. In addressing the questions of Islamic extremism, there is still essential cooperation in that area. And in terms of strengthening the non-proliferation regime, including the North Korean issue, there is still cooperation between our two sides. But in addition, on other issues like the relationship among nuclear powers, the problem of weaponization of space that most of us are not focused on, the problem of lowering the nuclear threshold and making nuclear weapons usable, bunker busters on our side, incorporating nuclear weapons into conventional doctrine on the Russian side. When 90% of the weapons are held by these two countries, Russia is absolutely essential. Now, if we are going to make any kind of progress, it doesn't mean that we whitewash Russia or that we put our head in the sand or that we ignore all of the issues that the other side has raised so well about the reprehensible trends within Russia, but we're still then left with the question of how we address those issues effectively, not in ways that give us emotional satisfaction, but in ways in which we can make some progress. The experience I have is that if it's done carefully and with certain segments within Russia, including some that are fairly close to official circles, you can have a conversation about all of the issues that they raised.
Thanks
and
very
indeed,
much.
the Russians are the ones that are raising these issues themselves as their critics inside.
Robert Legvold, your time's up. Thank you very much. For the motion, Claudia Rosett.
Thank you. I think we are not debating here whether Russia is the enemy or becoming the enemy. We're discussing whether it is becoming our enemy. It is possible for the United States to have more than one, in fact, to have several. In trying to frame what we're actually talking about, the issue actually isn't what we do about it. That is a very important issue. It's one worth debating, and I once heard somebody say, well, the first thing we need to do is start by telling them what we need, the thing that we rather neglected to do in the 1990s. We were so busy worrying about what Russia needed that we neglected to say, we as America need the following things. There have been a lot of points raised here. The one I'd most like to just refute is that we are cooperating in Islamic extremism. I would class in Islamic extremism the activities of Iran, a genuine terrorist sponsoring state. I think there's no doubt about that. And on that, Russia, along with China, has been one of the main stumbling blocks in American efforts to actually stop that nuclear program. In the larger picture, is Russia becoming our enemy? We can discuss many ways in which Russia is aggrieved, challenged, needs validation, peeved, etc., and so on. But we've heard here a list of things going badly wrong inside Russia itself. What we've heard effectively is there is no real check on what is happening with the power that now accrues to the Kremlin. And the agenda that will follow is one where we've heard a list, as Bret gave you, of the kinds of things that come from that. They are dangerous. They are inimical to the kind of values this country stands for. And in some things, they've been downright confrontational, singling out the U.S. I want to tell you just a quick anecdote. A wonderful,
in 8 seconds, please.
An editor of mine once explained the difficulty with defining insider trading. He said it's a very blurry line when you really start parsing the cases. But if you find yourself walking around with suitcases full of cash, making calls from payphones, you have crossed that line.
Claudia Rosett, your
with
time's
enemy, may I just suggest that when you find yourself running a Geiger counter over the teapot and trying to defend obvious interests of the free world.
You've made your point.
Thank you.
Nina Khrushcheva against the motion.
Thank you. I would like to go back to what our side keeps arguing, is that what is the policy? What is to be done? Because obviously Russia is a difficult case to defend today. So when I was thinking how I would wrap up, provided that there would be no surprises, and I started looking for some great American or great British diplomats, because they seem to have really a lot to say about the Soviet Union at the time, people like George Kennan and Isaiah Berlin. And actually, please forgive me, I would like to quote from Isaiah Berlin, who was a Russian Empire-born British diplomat, political philosopher, and historian of ideas. And this is a short piece, 1946, written, "Why the Soviet Union Chooses to Insulate Itself." And here is the quote: "It is necessary to remember that the Russians do not believe a word we say because they think they understand us more clearly than we do ourselves. True or not, it has been centuries-long conviction that the West is out to get them. The only way to convince them is the British," and we can say the West or the United States today, "mean no harm is simply by not meaning any. They will always judge behavior by deeds and not words. If we follow an undeviating policy with whatever we believe right for its end, making concessions where possible, but not letting the end out of sight, and if treat the Russians as any other great power despite their odd, non-reciprocal behavior, and do not answer back despite their intolerable provocation, but firmly contrive to work for whatever seems in our and the world's crucial interest, then we may hope for success. Otherwise, the wrangle of policies will become an ideological, ultimately armed conflict and end in war between principles equally unacceptable to liberal persons." Thank you.
Nina Khrushcheva and Isaiah Berlin, thank you very much. And Bret Stephens for the motion.
None of us on this side wish to see Russia as an enemy again. We are not looking for another enemy. We have enemies enough in places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, and Iraq. The battle against Islamic militancy and radicalism is one that we would do better to fight alongside Russia, not at cross purposes with it. We also don't want to needlessly antagonize Russia with rhetorical excesses. But as Václav Havel told me when I interviewed him in June, with me, Putin, as he called him, becomes more and more suspicious. We have to tell him plainly what we think of his behavior. Mr. Havel has a philosophy about that. It's called living in truth. So let's tell Mr. Putin the truth. Let's tell ourselves the truth. We worry about the political trends within Russia, not just because we are friends of democracy, human rights, freedom, the rule of law, but because the respect that governments have for their own people tend to correlate with their attitude and behavior vis-a-vis the outside world. We worry about Russian behavior toward countries like Ukraine, Estonia, and Georgia because we fear that that behavior is a harbinger for what's in store for Europe and the United States. And we look on the trends in Russian attitudes toward journalists, human rights groups, foreign investors, neighbors, toward their own history, and finally towards us with growing alarm. And the direction seems clear and unrelenting, and it leads us to conclude that Russia is on its way toward again becoming an enemy of the United States, and we won't be able to do anything to change that until we come to terms with the reality that we are facing. Thank you.